Welcome to episode 12 of the 1988 Honda CR500 two-stroke build. In episode 11, I got this bike started for the first time. The vibration was so violent it almost rattled off the stand in my garage. I cannot believe the sheer power and force you can feel from this bike. She is sort of bolted together right now, but if you look closely, there are a handful of things left to do, including the installation of a rear shock and the airbox. Need to solve some problems for these plastics, and a couple other things to address that we'll talk about throughout the video. If all goes to plan in today's episode, I'll be able to get this thing tuned up and ripping up and down the block for the very first time. If you guys have watched or followed along with any of my other bike giveaways in the past, you'll know that I generally ride the bikes on dirt once, maybe twice. With this CR500, I am the most torn of any build. Part of me feels like I shouldn't be the one to put this thing on dirt for the first time, just with the caliber of the build, the era of the bike. But I don't think that feeling outweighs my desire to ride it once, as I've never even gotten to ride a CR500, to enjoy the fruits of my labor and get to ride this thing once just to experience the ferocious power of a CR500. So I'm gonna be incredibly careful with it and try to keep it as pristine as possible for just one quick ride. But I think it's something I gotta do. With that said, entries to win this bike are open until November 1st. You can get entered over on my website, and with that, let's jump in to episode 12. We will begin with this new eBay rear shock. I purchased this entire shock just to rob this piece right here.
Let's get it done. Hey, no scratching on my mats. Oh. Yes, it's fire. With that eBay rear shock disassembled, I almost made the same mistake as I did with the original. Although with the original, it was seriously seized and potentially unrecoverable, this one didn't want to move. But I exercised a little patience, letting it soak in PB Blaster for days before attempting to move it again. And voila, the adjuster broke free. What a relief. I rebuilt that adjuster with fresh, clean components and new grease, and the shock was finally ready for assembly. Note, this shock rebuild includes a new Tusk seal head available from Rocky Mountain and a brand new OEM piston band. And once again, the shock body was anodized and shock shafts tinitride coated by Precision Works. Let's get this beauty assembled. Also, this shock bumper is for a 1989 CR500, but will do the trick, and it came from Prime MX, which I will talk much more about later in the video. It'll be hard to believe this shock is for a 1988 when you see it finished. With the shock 90% assembled, it was time to add oil and bleed. While most videos online tend to show bleeding through the shock body as you install the piston, it is tricky and easy to allow air into the system. Now, by no means am I a suspension expert. In fact, I think it's one of the hardest parts of a dirt bike to work on. But I've had the opportunity to learn tips from a couple suspension experts, Daniel Schmidt at DSC Motorsports and Mike Tlusty from Deja Moto. Daniel showed me how to bleed a shock through the compression adjuster, which is a more thorough and reliable method. Thus, I patiently went through the bleed process and finally installed the compression adjuster. But the shock still needed a nitrogen charge. Mikey at Deja Moto is my local tech, and thankfully he is willing to help on projects, so big thanks to Mikey for charging this thing up, and holy cow, this beautiful, fully rebuilt 1988 CR500 rear shock is ready for installation.
Would you just look at it? Just look at it!
With the shock installed, I could finally properly tension the chain with those gorgeous titanium adjusters from Rocky Mountain, and man, this thing is looking good. My attention then shifted to the radiator shrouds. Unfortunately, OEM shrouds are unavailable and aftermarket shrouds are mediocre. These shrouds don't come drilled, so I had to locate and drill the holes myself, and even then, the left shroud was off on fitment as it overlapped the tank. I carefully spent some time with my rotary tool, which I've been mounting in my vise and has been quite effective, and slowly but surely removed a bit of material at a time until the fitment was correct. With that, I did a test fitment of the shrouds and they indeed bolted up. But these aftermarket shrouds were a different texture and a slightly different color than everything else on the bike. You can hear as I run my fingernails across the front fender, for example, and then as I run my fingers across the radiator shrouds. They are very coarse, which contributes to a rougher look and possibly the color difference. The airbox still needed to be refinished as well, as I was lazy the first time around, hoping Cerakote would hide some imperfections that it did not, as Cerakote is a very thin finish. Thus, I busted out my polishing kit from Prime MX that I used to restore the fuel tank. As I used this kit once again, I sat there appreciating Cameron Niemela and what he did for this community. I can't imagine the time in development and testing that went into creating this product. It is an intricate process with 7 different sanding steps followed by 2 very particular polishing steps. It's not really a quick or easy process, and developing it had to be 10 times harder. Cam contributes to my life in this shop on a near daily basis, and I think about him often. If you are unfamiliar, as I realize as time goes on there are more of you who don't know, he passed away battling cancer and left behind a beautiful family and the incredible business he built, which his wife Haley and friend Nick are keeping alive. So if there's ever a company worth supporting or checking out what they have to offer, I really believe Prime MX has something for anyone who likes to work on their dirt bike. Now, this is a major example of trust the process, as these were the shrouds partway through. But many hours of hard work later, here is the outcome of the radiator shrouds. As for the airbox, it was fully prepped to be Cerakoted yet again, which will result in a beautiful finish this time as I put in the appropriate legwork. But first, here's the installation of those shrouds, which look and match significantly better than they did before and could finally receive these beautiful replica CR500 decals from the awesome crew over at Decal Works. Stickers on, I think it's official. This is a CR500 reincarnated. I then Cerakoted and cured the airbox, and this time it turned out incredible. This is now a part I'm proud to put back on this bike. One more shout out to my subscriber Danny, who sent me this airbox, as the OEM one from this 88 was mangled and sunbaked beyond repair. With the airbox properly refinished this time, I can now install the boot and get the subframe and airbox installed on the bike.
I need this boot held like this while this screw gets tightened. This boot is so slippery.
How tight you want me to go?
Well, that's about as tight as you can go. The clamp's shut. Man. Okay. All right, thanks. I got problem solving to do.
Once again, another unexpected curveball. This aftermarket boot has a barely smaller outer diameter than the OEM boot, which was crusty and unusable, so the OEM 70mm clamp is too large and the boot slides off of the carb. I drove to every dealership in town trying to find something, but then ended up robbing a 64mm clamp from the CR500 I have torn apart. This clamp was slightly too small, but with a new longer bolt from the hardware store, I made it work for now, and I have a 66mm clamp on the way, which should do the trick perfectly.
David, do you approve? Do you approve of the solution? Say, woo!
So, with that unexpected issue resolved and an even better solution in the mail, the rest of the bike is ready for assembly.
Oh my god, I don't know if I'm gonna put this on the internet, but I'm literally crying right now. It's freaking done.
All right, buddy, cut the waterworks. We ain't done yet. That said, the CR500 could finally come off of the Tusk scissor lift stand and onto a normal box stand, with one of the final touches being frame guards from Prime MX. Powder Coating of Montana did an incredible job on this frame, and for the one ride I will take this bike on dirt for, and if the winner of this bike decides to ride it, these guards will keep the powder coating pristine.
For the first time in all its glory, I would like to present you the 1988 Honda CR500 two-stroke. I really debated including me getting emotional about this bike in this video, but seeing this bike come together for the first time after thinking about the whole process from start to finish of what it took to bring this thing back to life, this is the most proud I've ever been of a project. And I think a lot of that emotion comes not just from this being a dirt bike build, but from where it all started to taking the leap to quit my job, to start building dirt bikes and making YouTube videos for a living a few years ago, and now being able to build a CR500 like this. I'm just overwhelmed with joy, gratitude, pride of what I've been able to accomplish with this thing right here from its starting point. And it's really, really cool to be able to share the whole process with so many of you who are thrilled to follow along, and that means so much to me. While there are still a couple small tweaks and adjustments I would like to make, for all intents and purposes, this build is finished. I've gotten asked a handful of times throughout this build, man, is it gonna be hard to let that thing go? And of course it is. But you guys watching these videos and entering to win these bikes is what makes this whole thing possible for me, and really, the process of bringing this back to life is more exciting than this sitting in my garage or living room. I will say, if I didn't feel, an obligation to keep this thing as pristine as possible for whoever wins it, I'd like to hammer it on dirt a little bit more than I'm actually going to. But that's okay. You can still enter for your chance to win this bike through November 1st. And with that said, I'm gonna do a couple heat cycles on this thing, and then let's rip it around the block and see how the 500 runs. Oh my god, I am riding the CR500. We're going easy on her. First ride, not fully broken in, but we're gonna break in this smart carb so that we can properly adjust the idle. It just needs to run for a little bit. But oh boy, if there's a bike to piss off the neighbors, this is certainly the one. 1/10 throttle, we're just cruising. But with the RM125 build, I was struggling to get it to idle, and Smart Carb does advertise they can take 20-30 minutes of runtime to break in properly, and then after that, that bike idled just fine. So, just cruising this thing around, low RPMs, letting that carb break in, let all the parts seat, will then give me a much more accurate adjustment of that Smart Carb. Boy, I figured middle of the day on a Monday would probably be an acceptable time to do this, but I'm getting some looks. This thing's mean and it's loud. All right, cylinder's nice and warm. We're not gonna abuse her, but let's crack the throttle for the first time. Oh my God. I just barely twisted it for the first time and the front wheels just, yeah! Holy cow. Wow, all right. We're gonna heat cycle it a couple more times, properly break this thing in, get it to idle, and then we'll crack it open properly. But guys, I've officially ridden the 1988 CR500. It runs, it shifts, let's freaking go. Woo! Dude, no freaking way.
Now, from a cosmetic perspective, the bike is done and it's gorgeous. But it's not 100% functional yet, at least to the level I want it. What I didn't share yet was the bike was starting first kick pretty much every time for a while, and then it seemed to get a little intermittent. This thing had a somewhat weak spark from the beginning, and when I checked it again, the spark itself is intermittent. So I believe any potential problems are electrical related. So I have a new stator, ignition, and spark plug cap on the way from the guys at MSV Racing, which I believe will resolve this inconsistent starting issue, but we will see if my diagnosis is correct. Along with that, there is a coolant leak from somewhere. It is not spewing, it's a slow drip, which is actually kind of tricky to track down. Now, as I went to remove the seat and tank to further investigate, I had another very unfortunate discovery. This OEM fuel tank that I spent around 20 hours restoring has since cracked after putting fuel in it and the stress from vibrations of the bike. It basked in the sun for who knows how many decades and simply couldn't take any more. That said, it is not currently leaking, but it's probably not reliable long term. IMS does make an oversized tank that could be used for the functional tank on this bike, and this OEM one be used as a drained show tank, unless I can get my hands on a replacement OEM, but they're really hard to find. If you know of anything, please reach out. For now, I filled the cracks with JB plastic weld. Now, while I had this tank off, I took the opportunity to replace the throttle. You guys know I went through this whole ordeal to make the OEM throttle work, with cutting new threads, Cerakoting, having Chase 3D print me a custom throttle cam, etc., but at the end of the day, I realized how flawed that old throttle design is. There is no roller for the cable, which creates a lot of resistance, and the throttle took more effort than it should to twist. I sourced a Motion Pro throttle assembly, which worked with an RM250 throttle cable, and I was able to get it installed, which indeed made the throttle operation significantly more easy and smooth. From here, I tried to track down where on earth that coolant is coming from, as it's not from any of the hose outlets and seems to be somewhere up high in the left radiator. I discovered what might be a crack, but it's really difficult to tell. I slapped a small amount of JB Weld in there, which will be completely invisible with where it's tucked away, but I just want to see if that is where it's coming from, or if I should pull this radiator for a thorough inspection. It only leaks if the coolant is flowing, which means the bike needs to be running.
But with the current intermittent starting issue that I have a high level of confidence is electrical related, I'm kind of just putting a beating on this Kickstarter by kicking this thing over so many times before it actually fires. So I'm going to wait for those MSV Racing components, which is a stator, an ignition, and a spark plug cap. Replace those before I run this bike any further. I believe that will solve the problem, and then I'll be able to further diagnose where exactly this coolant leak is coming from, because it's kind of peculiar to be able to look at this radiator and not really see anywhere that's obvious where the coolant is coming from. So it is always something. This bike has been quite the learning experience, but it is literally 99% done. So you guys can expect another video getting these final little issues wrapped up and then putting this thing on dirt, where I will ride it very briefly, but I just have to feel the power of this 500 for one ride. If anybody knows of an OEM 1988 CR500 tank that you would be willing to sell me, please reach out, as I would like to replace this OEM tank with one that's in better condition. I do have a couple more videos planned for this bike, including a total cost breakdown, where I will describe in detail everything that went into bringing this bike back to life. And as I do with all of my builds, once this thing is fully wrapped up, there will be a long format, start to finish build video that ties this entire series into one video. Guys, one of you is going to win this beast. You can get some direct entries on my website, or I have some sweet merch items as well. Your support is greatly appreciated. Additional links and discount codes are down in the description below. Thank you so much for following along with this series, and I'm going to leave you with some before and after shots of this build.